In education today, educators, students, and school administrators across the U.S. face unprecedented challenges. The need for innovation in education has never been greater. Welcome to Agile's Educator Insight video series Education Matters, where we get a classroom perspective from educators who have met educational challenges and exceeded expectations through extraordinary strides in academic intervention, achievements, and learning recovery. In the latest installment of the series, host Ali Newcomb welcomes featured educator and expert Meredith Beisinger for a deep dive into the evolving landscape of homeschooling. Together, they explore how families can rethink time management and adopt intentional practices that support more balanced, enriching at-home learning experiences. From practical strategies to mindset shifts, this conversation offers valuable insights for parents and students looking to create a fulfilling and personalized approach to education.
Well, welcome, Meredith, to another one of our wonderful and informative conversations with you about the education space. Today, we are going to be talking about some recent content you wrote on just the trend that isn't new, but it's continuing to accelerate of families choosing to take their children out of public school in favor of homeschooling options. So I guess to frame today's discussion, could you share a little with us about what drew you to the focus in this recent increase? And, what trends are you seeing in the families that are making the decision to change from public school to a homeschooling option?
Sure, absolutely. It's always a pleasure to be here and speak with you. So thank you for having me again. Homeschool is nothing new, but something that struck me in terms of data and numbers is that in 2019, I read, this is according to the US Census, like 3.4% of student age population kids were homeschooling. And now in 2024, 2025, that's doubled. And, that's
Wow.
not just because of COVID-19, that's because parents are frustrated, their children are frustrated, and teachers are frustrated too. So you're seeing parents pull their children out of school for different reasons. Maybe it's because of the curriculum. Maybe it's because they want a little more autonomy over what and when their child is learning. You might have a student athlete or a student musician who wants more time to focus on that, but still needs to get their academics done. Time and flexibility and intention, I think, are the main focuses for families. Teachers want to teach, but they want to teach without all of the other distractions that come with, public school and those guidelines and the things that they're responsible for. They just want to be able to teach, which is what they went to school for. And so you're seeing teachers leave the traditional classroom and start co-ops or start, charter schools or little miniature private schools so that they can still teach and do what they love to do and teach children and give children options to continue schooling and maybe not do it at home in their living room every day. But it's just providing flexibility and opportunity to everybody involved.
Teachers having more flexibility and, less sort of mandated requirements, endless standardized testing, all of those things. I'm sure there's other reasons, but that's something that I had not been aware of myself. So that this is just especially the dramatic increase that it's doubled is pretty mind blowing. So just thinking as a from a parent's perspective, if we were going to take our children out of school for a homeschooling option, first I wouldn't know where to start, but also really how to evaluate, between the two options, what's best for the kids. So could you talk a little bit about what some of the biggest challenges are for families when they are moving from public school to homeschooling and how they can overcome them?
Sure. I think making that decision itself can be scary because parents, they feel like their child needs something else, they want something else, but then, okay, how do we do it? And especially if you have two working parents and they're trying to balance that time, which that can be done because the beautiful thing about homeschooling is it's not 7:30 to 3:30. As long as you're getting it done, you can make that work with your family schedule. And that's something I would remind people of. There's not a right way to homeschool, but you do have to teach school. I mean, it's not just a free for all at the house.
Mhm.
And sometimes there's a misconception there that that's what's happening, but they need to figure out what works best for them. So what time of day would we be doing school? What kind of curriculum do we like? If they know a homeschool family that they, admire, or someone who's successful in homeschooling, talk to them. What do they do? What kind of curriculum do they use? What's important? Are you wanting a faith-based curriculum? Are you wanting a STEM-based curriculum, fine arts? There's so much out there now that they can get at different price ranges too. I know sometimes that can be daunting. They think it's going to be so expensive. And there's a lot of options out there that are not expensive, that are still fabulous. So it would be prioritizing time, when you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, and what curriculum.
That makes sense. And I guess depending on the state you live in, are there requirements for whichever homeschooling choice that you select to get approval, or to make sure that that's noted in state, attendance files, and that they are in fact in some sort of education, and truancy is not become an issue?
That's a great point. Yes, know your state's laws, because every state is different. So make sure you talk to your school district, you talk to your Department of Education for your state, because every state is going to be different. In Mississippi right now, it's not a very strict process. It's some paperwork and proof of life, right? Proof of schooling going on. Some states are more strict. So yeah, that's a good point.
Just make sure you do your research. So I guess let's, role play as a family who's considering this. So if we're a parent who is considering this transition, what are the most important first steps, planning this out, providing kind of a roadmap that would really ensure that the process is as smooth as possible?
Okay, so I would start with knowing your state's laws and the expectations there, get all of that sorted out. Then sit down as a family and talk about what are your priorities for the curriculum, and study out different curriculum, talk to people, select a curriculum, and then sit down, as a family, and figure out the time of day that you're going to get this done, and how you're going to hold each other accountable for that. Because it's really easy. My kids and I do this over summer break. We're not homeschooling, but I start the summer with all these expectations. And then, it's July and they're just hanging out, and, they're not doing chores or reading like I wanted them to. And so it can get away from you. And I imagine, I've not homeschooled my children before, but I imagine that you would have to have a routine. You would have to have a structure to make sure you're getting that done every day.
I remember just in the beginning of COVID, even though they were online schooling, I felt like I was going to have a nervous breakdown most days, just because we're all working. But then there is that, just at least management of their schooling, making sure, and just that, felt like I was doing a terrible job. So I can imagine, really making sure that you've laid the ground rules, and there's understanding of expectations and requirements of time and accountability on both sides, just to make sure that, you don't start it thinking it's a good idea and then get to a point where, the follow through isn't there.
Right. And I think too, it's important to remember it was an intentional decision. Children have to go to school, but homeschooling is an intentional choice that is supposed to bring joy, because you made that choice for a reason, whatever it may be. It might be for health reasons. It might be for frustration with your current school system. There's all kinds of reasons behind it, but it's an intentional choice. So you want to make it work for you, and just figuring out how to do that best.
I know we have, one homeschooling family where I live, and they are part of a group where they might not meet up every day, but they do get together pretty regularly, at least, 1 or 2 times a week as part of their schooling, or sort of experiential. But, depending on the family and concerns, because kids they learn at school, but they also kind of learn to be people at
Yeah.
school too, through, socialization from the, very start all the way through. So for, homeschooling families
And
looking to kind of address any concerns about socialization and building a supportive community for their children, do you have any advice or guidance for that?
yes, I think now is a much easier time to homeschool than it would have been 10, 20 plus years ago, because it is more common. And depending on where you live, just like recreational sports, community activities, finding other homeschool groups, like a co-op. I know some families that on Fridays, it's like field trip Fridays, and they get their homeschool kids together and they go and they do something, in their community or somewhere nearby. Just keeping those connections through their interests, like their recreational interests, but also through other children that might be homeschooling, getting together with them. And, like if they were in public school and they had friends there, I mean, just because you're not in that classroom anymore, you can still be friends. Like plan social activities, have them come over, plan play dates, or, if they're older, plan something fun on the weekend that they can go and do. That social connection does not have to be lost. You're just not in the classroom with them during the day.
Well, and even, I know not the school team sports, but those outside of school leagues, summer leagues and different, I mean, they're so widely available that even if they've left the school, they could also still continue. And those feel like they go year round, at least
Right.
from a parent's
Yeah,
perspective.
the rec league sports, if you have an aquatic center, just community sports. In some states, that Tim Tebow law passed where high school and middle school athletes can participate in their school district sports. So, if you have a child who loves, let's say, playing football or something, but you want to homeschool, he can still be part of that school football team, depending on what state you're in. And so that's an option too. I think that's been a hesitation for many families and children in the past because they don't want to give up certain pieces. But now, there's some pathways being made where they can do those things.
Oh, no, I did not know about that. So Tim Tebow, the player,
The
Florida,
player.
yeah.
The Tim Tebow law, and it's in several states. It just passed in Mississippi, went to the Senate. But so if you have a ninth grader who loves basketball, he can still play basketball with his school team. He has to go to practices and everything like that, but he can homeschool and still participate. It's pretty
That's a
neat.
clear lag indicator of the increase in people,
Yes.
families choosing to homeschool, obviously.
Exactly.
Like you said, 10 years ago and now, it's a big difference in how it's easier to make this choice. You have more options. It's not that you have to literally figure out curriculum, learn how to be a teacher yourself. But I imagine with the increase in this happening, there's been a proliferation of different, tools, curriculum that are available for families who are making this choice. So, for families who might be overwhelmed by just the variety of, supporting homeschooling curriculum and different approaches that are available, what would your advice be for how to sort of sift through and evaluate what would be right for their children?
I mean, hopefully you know your child best, right? That's the hope. So as a family and then knowing your child, what's important to you? Do you want it faith-based? Are you looking for a faith-based curriculum? Are you looking for something to be a little more STEM heavy with math, science, technology? Does your child love the arts? Do you want an underlying theme of fine arts? And kind of begin there. And that'll help you sift out a lot of other things. And then look at that curriculum that you're most interested with those themes. So if you want faith-based, here's 10 different ones that come highly recommended. Look at those, look at what they're like, look at the price range if that's, a concern. Talk to people who are homeschooling, see if they've used that curriculum. Talk to people you trust who are involved with that or are currently homeschooling. Get their advice because they're the ones that are doing it. Study out the curriculum, decide what's important to you,
Mm-hmm. And do you know if there are I mean, I imagine there may be, and it could be the fact that many of these curriculum sort of programmatic choices will provide this information, but are there any regulatory requirements from states or beyond that that will approve or not approve a curriculum, or as
So
long as it's covering topics, it's fine? I mean, is there sort of an approval process that you have to go through?
it depends on the state. In some state programs, it's not necessarily homeschool, but some states, like I believe Utah, they have an electronic high school through the state. So you can be home, but you're doing your schooling online, but through the state, you
Okay.
know. So that's an option too. And that I believe is free, but not every state has that. So definitely check, make sure you're checking all the boxes that you need to check according to your state. Some are more strict than others.
And we'll definitely include in, the resources for this video, just some recommended portals or locations where they might provide, recommendations, reviews, and information about these different curriculum, just for if there are families that are interested, or teachers who are interested in making that change. So kind of part of, I keep coming back to kind of like regulatory and approval, just because the main mechanism of, requirement of school and the verification that you're in school is through the state and through public schools. So when you're looking at measuring success, both from how the parents can track and measure their child's academic and personal growth, after leaving from the public school where that was all included,
Right.
so how do parents do that? And then is there a requirement of some sort of reporting of, the success or the whatever benchmarks, learning levels that their students have met, at the end of a year, just to make sure that they're on track for
Right.
that grade level.
I think a huge part of that is we're so used to logging into Active Parent or Power School or whatever and checking grades, and then you get the transcript. But I can't tell you how many times, okay, these grades all look great, and then I ask them what they've learned. It's like, I don't know. I don't remember, And some of that's just probably attitude, but other times, it's information poured in to take a test, and then it exits out and
Out the other ear, yeah.
right, exactly. Homeschooling provides the opportunity to kind of teach and learn with intention. And so portfolios are a really popular way for parents to prove that their child is academically progressing and participating. But it's also just a really kind of live transcript of everything that they're doing in case the state that you live in were to question you or something like that. You can prove that they've been doing these things. It also can help with, college applications, scholarships, things like that. It's a really lovely way to, and interact with your child and collect this kind of academic portfolio. Also too, just mini assessments, we're not talking huge state standardized tests, but mini assessments, and a lot of the curriculum that you can get online come with those built in. So, and they track things. If they're doing an online curriculum, 9 times out of 10, that's going to come with some kind of academic tracker or way to measure where they are. And so that makes it easy. And again, just conversations, you now get to sit at the kitchen table or wherever you are and do a science experiment and talk about it and see if they actually remember and learned and can do it again, which is a neat thing.
So like you can actually gauge knowledge transfer, whereas, at least for us right now, is it in Power School sometimes, but then depending on the teacher, they might not put their grades in until the end of the year. It's just, there are challenges with feeling like you're really engaged with and can support your student, to make sure that they're doing as best they can. And at the end of the day, really learning, what they're supposed to learn at each grade level.
Right. And if they're not learning it, then you have the opportunity to go back and slow down and teach it again and figure out where the disconnect there is, where a teacher with 25, 30 students in their classroom, just not because they don't want to, they just don't always have the opportunity to do that, and so that's a plus.
Well, and I mean, the issue of different learning styles, I mean, this would be an ideal opportunity to really target specifically, that child or children's learning styles at that individual basis, which, like you said, when there's 30, sometimes more students in a classroom, that's not an option.
Right, exactly. So, if they're a hands-on learner, you can do a lot of hands-on learning type, activities and experiments and things like that. And, that would be a game changer for that child, or, visual, wherever their strength is.
You're clearly familiar with this. I am not, even though, we've sort of felt like we had like a mini dive from a high dive into the pool during COVID.
Yeah.
But, since this is not just increased significantly, but there are so many different options, people may have assumptions about homeschool that are no longer accurate. So, what are some of the common misconceptions about homeschooling that you wish more people understood, especially those who are brand new to the idea or the concept?
Yeah, I think the pendulum really swings left to right there. So you have those who think homeschool is for, students and families who want to isolate, they don't want to get involved, maybe they're socially awkward or inept, and so they're homeschooling because that's what works best for them. That's not really the case. That homeschooling is a choice now by families and students because they want flexibility and they want the opportunity to be involved with their child's education. There's also misconceptions that like these kids don't do anything at home. They, it's a free for all. They're not really learning. Mom and dad didn't want to get them up and get them ready for school in the morning, or whatever. And that's not true either. I'm not saying that those cases don't happen here and there, but for the most part, the main reason for homeschooling is because parents wanted something else for their child, or their child needed something else. And so those misconceptions can be put to rest pretty quickly. If you spent time with a child who has successfully been homeschooled, they're really very well-rounded and in some unique ways that you can't get in the public school. Both offer good things. It's not anti-public school or anti-homeschool. It's just what works best for your child.
Well, and that the family that I mentioned earlier that we know where we live, who homeschools their children, they have two kids. The oldest is the same age as our youngest, and they've been friends through an extracurricular thing for years, but their oldest was homeschooled through 7th grade, and then they moved him into public school. It was a plan to move him into public school, and they did it in 8th grade. And I remember just knowing the family, loving them, but not really, knowing what their homeschooling looked like because I'm not part of it. I remember being had anxiety about like what that transition was going to be like for him, and he has excelled. So yes. To your point about like not really learning, again, I'm sure there's exceptions, but he got his mother is just a like Renaissance woman, and his foundational education, like he is excelling at the public middle school now, about to start high school. So that definitely disabused me of that misconception that I had, that I wasn't aware that I had it, but that makes a lot of sense.
My husband and I were talking about this. It's just, I don't know. I think it's a natural reaction, like, oh, you homeschooled. Do you know what I mean? And now it's kind of being debunked because it's become more popular, and you're meeting these really wonderful families and students who are successfully homeschooling. They're social. I kind of think in a way social media has helped with that, because you have like these homeschooling influencers, and we have access to so much community information. So you can see all kinds of things that are happening in your city or town that would be neat for your child to participate in, like an art class or a community soccer team or whatever. And back in the day, unless you just knew or you called City Hall or something like that, you just didn't know everything that was available. So definitely think technology plays a big role in that.
Definitely. And, I think this is just, again, this trend that seems to just be, continually increasing. I think it's going to be fascinating to see where it goes. I mean, even from, working at Agile and our perspective, we have in the last, I think, probably couple of years, there is a enrollment decline from public schools. So you look at the private school enrollment for an increase, and it's not there. And I think, this is probably
Really?
the answer
Yeah,
of where that is.
okay.
The increase of people choosing homeschooling or alternative schooling to either public or private. That gap in just our, the straight underlying data, like that really stands out as reinforcing that trend, with
Yeah.
real data.
Well, that's fascinating. I do think COVID, for better or for worse, showed people, hey, I can do this. And so you do have some that didn't return to that, or maybe they did return to school only to realize, you know what, actually, take the pandemic piece out of it. We really liked homeschooling. And so, yeah, definitely.
I mean, I definitely think it takes it's not every parent or family is suited for it. I don't know. I would fail them in just a magnificent way. But for people who that it's right for and can maintain that engagement and intentionality, it's just really interesting to hear, more from you about what this really looks like, and guidance for families who do fit that profile that I'm personally not part of, just because it sounds terrifying. But that just this guidance and sort of to dip their toe into something that they may have felt interested in, but just didn't know where to start.
Right. And I think too, you're right. It's not for every family. It's not for every child. I have 3 children. My oldest would not want to do that for not one single day would he not want to do that. And then I have another son who would be game on tomorrow. He would love it. You know what I mean? And so I think it's knowing your family and knowing your children and what's going to work best for them, and just your overall goal and what you're looking for. So
Absolutely. I feel like this ties into our return to intention conversation, but just in a real focused way. So it's a nice, sort of full circle of themes there. So, I'm excited to share this. Just, I think it's really helpful, practical guidance for folks, and also just sort of demystifying a trend that is not just a minority. It is snowballing. So
Right.
Is there any other thoughts you have or you'd like to share with any folks who are watching this?
No, I would say if you have that itch or that inclination to homeschool, just start doing research. Talk to people who have homeschooled and look for information online, talk to your state, your school district, make sure those I's are dotted and T's are crossed. We don't want anyone getting in any kind of trouble with that, with truancy and things like that. But now, now's the time to homeschool if that's what you want to do it. We are in an era where people can successfully homeschool, and that's exciting. And then, of course, I don't want to take away from the public school setting, because there are fabulous public schools and public teachers out there, but they are swimming upstream against a current that is not their fault, and that can be hard. And I think that's why we're seeing such a trend in homeschooling, because people, they want something different.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you as always for your wisdom and insight. It's just a joy to get to have these conversations with you, and we will look forward to the next one.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Allie.